Today we're going to talk about patterns, specifically contrast. Now, contrast is when you place two things that are in direct opposition near each other. And we use it all the time in the world, from our religious symbols to our buildings, to the clothes that we wear. Chances are that you will have a different color shirt versus the shorts or pants you're wearing. You're making use of contrast. Now, contrast is already embedded within a number of poetic devices, oxymoron and paradox being some of them, and of course the direct contrast of using words like not or the prefix un or something like that. But we aren't going to examine those. We're going to examine contrast, how authors use contrast in other means. And one way they do so is to create contrasting characters. Take a look at the two different poems we have here. In the first poem, you can see that the speaker that Atwood has created contrasts other people's concerns for the pigeon or the dodo or the crane, etc., with her own personal concern over the giant tortoises. And that's quite clear, and that's emphasized because those phrases are so close together. We look at Blake's poem, and the entire poem is an exercise in contrasting characters, whereas the clod itself is rather optimistic and sees the bright side of love. That poor pebble who's had a harsh time in the world is very pessimistic about love and its motivations. And we notice that that contrast is anchored with that lovely contrasting transition, but. So other ways that authors use contrast in poems is looking at contrasting actions. Take a look at these two poems here. In the first one, two hands, the contrasting actions are actually the actions of the two hands themselves. That's essentially the whole point of this poem. Whereas the speaker's father is a skilled and accomplished and busy surgeon, the speaker himself feels rather slow and only having talent in writing. Now, of course, this creates contrasting characters as well, but it's through the actions that that contrast is highlighted. In the other poem, A Woman to Her Lover, the actions aren't of different characters, but they're hypothetical actions that someone may take. Whereas in the first stanza, she describes these very oppressive actions that her lover could take. The fourth stanza contrasts with those actions by describing these actions of embracing the lover and this cooperative liberation that she's looking for. One other way in which authors can use contrast in poetry is through the images that they choose to highlight. So there's a few poems here. In the first one, Blackberry, Seamus Heaney is contrasting his association with the blackberries when he first picks them. We can see those words like ripened, sweet, lust, and wine, with what happens to the blackberries after a period of time, that they rot, they become stinking and sour and fermented. And this, rather than showing a constant progression of time, by highlighting the contrast, this also highlights his disappointment. In Bright Star, John Keats is contrasting the qualities of the star with his current situation. And there we can see the qualities are that the star is alone and simply watching, whereas Keats prefers to be embracing his lover in a physical, tactile way. Finally, in Shooting Stars, the contrast is within each line of the fifth stanza, or at least the first two. And here, the contrast is rather jarring, and that's because of the juxtaposition of these ideas. The items mentioned in blue are horrific things, immense suffering and terrible moans, whereas the items mentioned in red are rather mundane, casual, apathetic things, taking tea on the lawn and washing the uniform. And by juxtaposing these images, these contrasting images, she's certainly making a statement about how people react eventually to the horrors that they hear or see. These are just some ways that authors use contrast in poetry. Now that you're equipped and you know how to find them, go out and look at the poetry around you and see if authors are using contrast there to develop characters, to develop ideas, or to highlight the differences in key actions.